And then after a couple of months, I started to notice these real changes in my mindset, my thoughts, my feelings. My life started to turn around. And all this weird stuff started happening. I didn't have a clue what was happening at the time because, like I say, I wasn't into any of this type of stuff. And then eventually I realised I was actually going through a spiritual awakening, which, I consider my gift from God for doing this work. And it was so beautiful. I know when a lot of people talk about going through awakenings, they say, it's really dark night of the soul and horrific and everything like this. I'd already lived in hell for years. I wanted to die, And when I went through my awakening, it was just beautiful. All the synchronicities happened and you're getting the number sequences and started receiving information through the spirit and all this type of stuff.
Hi, Claire. Welcome to Cura Medicina podcast.
Hello there. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's so good to have you here. This is our second attempt at this podcast, and I'm even more excited now that I know some of your story.
Take two.
Yeah. I'd like to start with the journey of your life and talk a little bit about how you got to medicine. I'd love to hear your origin story. And then eventually we'll go into the work that you're doing and all that exciting. I have so many questions about that too. So I'm really excited to hear version 2 of your story here.
I'll make this one even better, I promise.
Yeah, great. I know the last one was so good. It was so good. Okay.
I'm from Scotland originally, and I'm now 45 years old, and I've been on this medicine path for 9 beautiful years now. As we both know, it is just the most phenomenal path, all of the blessings that come with it, and obviously to be able to support people on this path as well. There's no better job in the world. Like many people, I ended up in this path through a life of struggle, if you will. Obviously, I work with a lot of patients who have had really traumatic childhoods. That wasn't the case for me. However, my earliest memories going back from when I was a little toddler, I was always so fearful. I was so anxious. I traced it back with my therapist, when I had started therapy, that I was suffering from anxiety from very, very early childhood. And like I said, I didn't get through anything particularly bad or out of the ordinary, but I feel that some of us were just born very, very sensitive. I've always been so sensitive to everything around me, to emotions, other people's emotions. As I later went on to learn, this develops as a trauma response, why we become overly empathic and highly sensitive. But that was very much the case for me. And I was a very shy child. I had no self-confidence. I was very fearful. So by the time I got to my teenage years, I started to get involved with drinking drugs. And at the beginning, it was great because it allowed me to block out all of these feelings, all of the discomfort. And it gave me this false sense of confidence as well that I was looking for, because I was very insecure and very shy. But then by the time I had gotten into my 20s, the addictions with the alcohol and the drugs had gotten really out of control. I took everything, you name it, I was taking it. But I had a particularly bad addiction to alcohol and Valium. I could swallow hundreds of milligrams of Valium each day. Throughout this, though, I was functioning. I was studying, and I was actually doing my postgrad in psychology lecturing. And when I'd got to that stage, I was drinking before I was getting in and teaching. My anxiety, my depression, everything was just extreme. And I ended up having a really serious nervous breakdown, which ended that career. And to have a nervous breakdown is absolutely terrifying. You know, you lose your mind. And it's like losing your compass. You no longer know which way is north, south, east, or west. But for me, that wasn't my rock bottom. I just descended into more addiction and more chaos after that. And it wasn't until I got to my early 30s that I went on to my healing path. And the way it came about was really, really strange because up until then, I was an absolutely committed atheist. I didn't believe in spirit. If somebody talked to me about angels or anything, you know, I'd be like, that's all bullshit. Really, really dismissive of it all. But I was in my bedroom one day and this big, the only way I can describe it is as a download. A big download came through to me because up until that point, like anybody with addictions, we sit in victimhood. We're always blaming everybody else bar ourselves. And that was me to a T. But this big download just came through randomly one day that this is all your fault, Claire. You know, this is all your responsibility, the mess of your life. And I was in a terrible state. I just wanted to die at that point. And then straight after that, it was really interesting because then it came through that I have the power to change this. And it was the first time I ever had that realization that I could change myself, that I could change my life, that I had the power to do it. And from that day on, I just went hell for leather on my healing path. I had already, by that point, withdrawn off Valium. I actually had to do that twice, and that was beyond horrific because you can't sleep for 3 weeks at a time. You know, you're losing your mind. Your nervous system's no longer in that state of sedation, so the anxiety is just horrific. But I'd already been through that withdrawal. You know, I'd kind of curbed it a bit at this point, if you will. But I decided that day, I was like, that's it. I'm stopping the drinking, I'm stopping the drugs. And it was very, very challenging because I had thought that once I stopped the drinking, the drugs, my life was going to be a lot better because I thought that's what the problem was. But of course it wasn't. And when I stopped with them for the first time in my life, I had to sit with myself. I had to sit with my traumas. I had to sit with my feelings, all the guilt and shame that obviously you go through in your addictions as well. And I didn't really know what to do or how to make myself better, but I was kind of thinking about other people that seem to have their shit together, if you will, like Buddhists and other happy people out there. So I was like, right, I'm going to start going to the Buddhist center 3 or 4 times a week. So I started doing that. I started going to a therapist every week. Started listening to podcasts, self-help books, like you name it. I just was giving it 110% each day. And at first, it was so difficult, like I said, and I didn't notice any change. And it was mad how I kept going because the easiest thing would have been to go back. But something within me that I now know is my spirit, my soul, told me to keep going, you know, and I had that determination to do it. And then I started to notice changes a few months in, real positive changes. My whole mindset started to change, you know, how I spoke about myself, to myself, how I started to view the world and everything else from this more empowered standpoint. And I started to change my life. Everything started to go really nicely for me. And then all this real weird stuff started happening to me. And at the time, I didn't know what was happening. Like I said, I was a non-believer. But then I came to the awareness that I was actually going through a spiritual awakening. A lot of people, you know, when they go through their spiritual awakening, they talk of this dark night of the soul and how it's horrific and really difficult. It wasn't like that for me. It was just really, really beautiful. You know, I'd already kind of lived hell on earth. And when I went through my spiritual awakening, it was just beautiful. You know, you get the heart chakra opening and all the synchronicities. And then I was connecting with spirit and getting information coming through. It was just like, wowzers, this is just absolutely amazing, you know. I kept on that path, kept making progress. And then how I ended up in the medicine path was crazy because I got a huge big call-in 4 times in 1 week. So I was back home in Glasgow at the time, and I watched a documentary about ayahuasca, and I was like, excellent, really interesting. And then the next day, in one of the tabloid newspapers, there was a double page spread about ayahuasca. I'm like, this is weird, you know? In the same week, I got on the bus, and one of the fellow dog walkers was on the bus, and he started speaking to me about ayahuasca. And then a shaman from Colombia friended me on Facebook, and I ended up working with him eventually. So it was 4 call-ins all in 1 week. So I knew without any shadow of a doubt, I had to go and drink this ayahuasca, you know? So I spoke to my dad, and I told him, my dad's a lovely man. He's devout Catholic, very spiritual. And I says, Dad, you know, I've had this calling. I says, I'm going to leave Scotland. I'm going to move to Peru. I'm going to go to the jungle and I'm going to drink ayahuasca. And he's like, that's amazing, Claire. He's like, I'll buy your plane ticket for you. So I stayed behind in Scotland, you know, for about another year so as I could save up money. And then I ended up moving to Pucallpa in Peru. And I was living for 2 months in the jungle with a shamanic family. The shaman there was an 80-year-old man called Leo, and he was just a beautiful, beautiful man, just pure light. By this point, I didn't speak any Spanish or anything like that. So I was down the jungle, learning Spanish, working with the medicine, learning the ways of the medicine. And I left there after 2 months, started working with other shamans in Peru, eventually crossed the border to Colombia. And as soon as I crossed that border to Colombia, I felt the energy shift that like Colombia feels like home to me. There was just something in the energy there. So I ended up settling in Medellin. I was involved with the medicine community there. And at that point, because I was drinking a lot of medicine, I think, you know, by this point, I'd probably done about 100 ceremonies or something. You know, I was working pretty intensely with the medicine. So my friends would be like, Claire, can you take me to a ceremony? So I'd be like, yeah, no worries. I'd take them to a ceremony, look after them. And then I started doing wee tiny retreats each month down the jungle with just 3 or 4 people. So that was continuing on for a while. And then I received or was receiving another big calling. It kept coming through just in daily life all the time. You need to take the medicine to Europe. You need to take the medicine to Europe. But I wasn't listening at first because there was a lot of fear that was coming up for me there. Do you know, that's too risky. You can't do that. But the calling, as they do, they keep getting stronger and stronger. So then that was 2019. Me and my team moved to Europe, and yeah, everything's just evolved and grown since then.
Amazing. So you have this download in the middle of your chaotic life. Yeah, I'd love to hear some reflections on that moment because that moment changed your whole life, you know, and so many times, you know, I look at my own life and I've had moments like that, but they were like rooted in something I read or somebody I met. But for you, it sounded like it was like a direct communication, you know, straight to your heart.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah.
It was so pivotal, and it was just such a shock, but a good shock. But everything changed in that moment. I remember it so clearly. I was just standing there in my room in front of the mirrors, and boom, it just came through like a bolt for the blue. And you know, it's like my spirit, my soul was able to connect. You know, was able to listen, because we all have that ability, don't we? But up until then, it was as if it was just buried under the trauma. Do you know, I wasn't in touch with myself or my intuition or anything like this. But it was like a divine connection, but so powerful.
Yeah. And I wonder, what was it inside of you that, um, so I feel like people get these messages, but they don't actually take action. But you took this action that ended up, you know, sending your life in a whole new direction. why did you take that action? What was it inside of you that listened and then, you know, did all the hard work that you needed to do to live in a different way? Like that seems to be a missing point in a lot of people's journeys.
Yeah. For me, it was basically up until that point, I had wanted to change my life for a number of years. I would try and I would fail, but it was that whole thing that had come through to me that was that awareness that I had the power to do it. And it sounds a bit dense, a bit stupid thinking back on it now, but I wasn't aware that I had that power before, before that moment. But when that came through, I was like, well, I can do this. It was just like boom, like that. And then I just knew I could.
Yeah.
It's
So
hard
I
to
would
find the
suggest we
words
all,
to explain these things, because it's like the transmission that you get when you're working in the medicines, it's almost like a telepathic or a spirit to spirit awareness, it bypasses the mind.
yeah. And if anyone listening to this needs to take away one thing from this call, for me, that's it, that we all have that power. We all create our lives, no matter where we are or how stuck we think we are. Like it's possible. You and
Yeah.
I are living representations of that.
Yep, absolutely. And there's
So,
so many of us that manage to do it, and that's why obviously this work brings us so much joy because we look at the people who were in the situations that we were in. And even though they don't have the knowing and the hope yet, we know what's possible for them. We know they can do it.
yeah. The other thing that you said that I'm interested to tease out a little bit is so you went to Peru, that was your first, real experience. And then you got to and I could just see in your face when you got to Colombia, you're like a whole new thing opened up for you and it's still living inside of you, obviously. What How would you compare the two traditions if people are listening and they've never sat with a Colombian tradition or a Peruvian dish? Like, how would you kind of talk about those two traditions and their differences?
So I find them very different, the Peruvian and Colombian traditions. I think when people are looking for a ayahuasca path, because obviously there's so many different communities, even within the individual countries that have a lot of differences as well. And it depends what's best suited to the individual. So in Peru, when you drink the medicine, typically you're drinking bigger cups. It's not quite as reduced, although they will work with cielo, etc. there as well. But anyhow, in the place where I'd first started, it's big cups of the medicine. It's very bitter. You're drinking, gulping down bits of bark and everything like this. So the preparation's a little different in Colombia. We call it yahe. We call ayahuasca yahe. It's essentially exactly the same thing. Just go through a slightly different process. They'll basically raspear. They'll shave off the bark first before they start mashing it down, and they'll reduce it so as it's a very syrupy liquid and very sweet, and you're drinking less of it. In terms of ceremonial style, the Peruvians will tend to have it in pitch blackness. It's very, very dark in their ceremonies, whereas in the Colombians, there'll be little candles around. There's a little bit more light. Um, Another difference is that in the Peruvian style, what they'll tend to do is they'll tend to work with the Icaros to do the healing. Whereas in Colombia, there's more instruments and there's a lot more singing. It's singing all night. We're singing about God and starting again and family and love and nature and all these things. The Icaros and the music obviously both guide the plant to do her work. But I would say the Colombian style has a lot more community feel to it, I would say, and I feel a lot more kind of joyous as well.
Yeah, and I work with the Brazilian traditions quite a bit, and it sounds more like that. There's
Yep.
also basically there's no darkness, and the usually the chief sings a few of his prayers in the beginning, and then there's a community singing of prayers together. We usually stand up and we lock arms, and then there's a call and response of prayer in their language, and then Nokivana, and then the guitars and the drums, and it's like dancing, and they say soul alegria, right? Everything is joy. So their approach sounds very similar to the Colombian approach, interestingly enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And another difference is between the Peruvians and the Colombians is that the Peruvians and the Shipibo that I would work with, they'll do a thing called a chupar, to suck. So at times what you'll see is they'll put their lips to a patient and suck out the darkness. The shaman will do this and then vomit it out for them. It's not a thing that I've ever seen done in any of the Colombian traditions that I work with.
Yeah, the Brazilians do that too. So it's interesting as
Mm.
you move up, that Amazon area, how many similarities there are in those traditions. I think the Ecuadorian traditions also. I know there aren't a ton, but yeah, that's it's fascinating. And so the other thing that I appreciate about the Shipibos is their work with the dietas, with the plants. Do the do the Colombians have a dieta tradition, or are the shamans working with the plant? Yeah, just wondering about that a little bit.
It's Yeah, if people are looking to do dietas, this is what the Peruvians, the Shipibo, are renowned for, is the intense dieting of all the different plants. In the Colombian traditions, the shamans will diet the plants, but in terms of, patients going there to do dietas, no, it's not as much of a thing.
Okay. And the other thing I love about Colombian tradition is the working with the mambe. I don't know if you want to say a little bit about mambe, and
Get
um, if
the
yeah,
ambil.
if you're the tribes that you work with mambe also. I know I've even heard that some tribes don't work at all with with ayahuasca and only with mambe, which I think is fascinating.
hmm So yeah, in these traditions, we work with the mambe and ambil together. So the mambe is the powdered coca leaf, and we basically sit that in between the cheek and the lower gum. And the coca leaf is a feminine spirit. And the ambil is basically a tobacco paste. This is one of the other master plants that we work with, and is the masculine spirit. So in the communities, they say, they work together as a marriage. The mambe brings us an open heart and pure speech. And the ambil helps us to connect with divinity. And they help to connect both the heart and the mind together. These are much more subtle spirits, obviously, compared to something like ayahuasca. So it takes a while to build the relationship with these medicines. And what they'll do is they'll sit about in the communities in Mambiar. So, what they were used for traditionally would be, for example, if they are going out hunting that day, it gives them sustenance and it will slightly suppress the appetite. The coca leaf will. But what we do is we sit in the Mambe Ambil circles and we Mambiar and we'll sit and we'll listen to the elders, the abuelos, the abuelas. They'll sit and tell us about their mythology, about their history, and they're called talking medicines. So they're medicines that we utilize. For example, if there was ever to be any type of disagreement or dispute, they'll sit down in Mambiar because it's bringing that, allowing you to connect with the heart, to give you that understanding, to help you to see from other people's perspectives as well.
Yeah, mambe is such a beautiful medicine, and it's too bad that the coca leaf has been, had so much horrible reputation, because I think it's one of the most beautiful plants actually
Yeah,
on the planet, and
yeah,
I really
absolutely. And
appreciate
it's
that.
just,
Yeah,
it's been villainized, but like they say, you gave the coca leaf to the white man, and what did they do? They mixed it up with all these chemicals. So they say that these are cursed. This is why it's cursed with cocaine. It brings the destruction and the addictions. Likewise, what they've done with the tobacco, they've been misusing the spirit. So of course that carries a curse as well, which brings the addictions, the illness, the anxiety, because they've not been used in
Yeah.
their pure form. We need to work with them in their pure form and with their pure spirit.
Yeah. Speaking of tobacco, another thing that the Shipibo work a lot with tobacco, right? And they work with mapacho, and the Brazilians work with hape. And so, do the Colombians work with tobacco also?
Yeah, we work with the Colombian traditions with mapacho and also with the happy. Yeah, it's very prevalent in the communities, and we'll work with that during ceremony as well.
Great. And which tribe do you work with? Because there are several tribes in Colombia. And is there one in particular that you've been working with?
Yeah, so we work with the Awa. So it's actually a tiny little tribe. It's one of the smallest ayahuasca tribes. The bigger ones will be like the Kofanis, Sibundoy, Inga as well. So the Awa is a very, very small community across northern Ecuador and southern Colombia. And the Cabildo that we work with, they were initially displaced, so they ended up in Orito, which is a little jungle town there. And we've got a beautiful, beautiful community there. And similar to the NGO work that you do with your community, helping them with their building their infrastructure and giving them this type of support. That's exactly what we do with the AWA as well.
Awesome. Okay, let's imagine that I just signed up to join you on one of your trips. Walk me through the whole trip, from where we land, where we go, where I sleep, what I eat. Yeah, walk us through for anyone listening out there that's interested in coming. I'd love for them to know all about it.
So, for example, when we do our 10-day retreats down the jungle, so what we say to the patients when they're signing up with us is that they're not coming to like a retreat center that's geared towards Westerners. They're coming down to the jungle to live with us, to live with the indigenous people for 10 days and do everything that they do essentially. So it's not like one of these retreats where it's like, oh, on Thursday night you're going to be in an ayahuasca ceremony and it's happening at this time, and on this day you're doing this, that, and the next thing. Because as we know as well, the indigenous people don't work like that. They don't plan like us. But what we do, there's certain points that we'll hit. We always do the things. It's just we don't have a specific order, if you will. But for example, we'll do 5 ayahuasca ceremonies. There'll be 2 cambos. We're doing yoga, breath work, do river swims. We do a lot of a lot of walks about the jungle as well. As you know, ayahuasca is a very, very slow growing crop. It takes 7 years to get to a level of maturity where we can even work with her. But the younger the vine, the less potency that she has. But down the jungle, we've got huge big vines that are like 25 years plus and everything like this. And for us, it's very, very important, the sustainability. So, for example, just there in September, we planted 100 new baby vines in the little nursery. They'll grow up to a certain age and then they'll get, rewilded back out into the jungle because, of course, we need to protect this medicine, especially because it's amazing that so many people are working with ayahuasca now in the world, but we need to be very, very careful with the conservation. So, we'll spend time taking them through the jungle, showing them the vines, showing them all the different other plants that we have in the jungle. Because as you know, there's medicines for everything, whatever ailment people are suffering from, there are cures for it. So really kind of educating them in that. And there's also a big onus on the retreat as well. the indigenous way of life. This is what we're doing down there. And it was beautiful because when we go down there, the community tells us our taita, they're called maestros, the master shamans in Peru. In Colombia, they're called taitas. So our taita was basically trained by his grandfather, Taita Jose. And he passed away a couple of years ago. He was over 100 years old. Nobody knows exactly because obviously they weren't recording the births and everything like we do in the West. But he was getting visions through, you're talking decades ago, that the white people would come to their land to help them and support them. And here we are now. So it's very important that we're building them houses, getting them the infrastructure there. Next year as well, we will plan on building them a school so as they're not losing their indigenous language, the Awa, and so as that the children can keep getting taught in the indigenous ways of life. So when we're down there, the community members, the indigenous community members are there with us, telling us all about their history, showing us like their instruments, their dances, their way of life. So it's just absolutely beautiful.
Amazing. Can you walk us through what a ceremony's like? Like, how does it start, and what instruments are played, and how long does it last, and how many cups can we drink? All of like the main. Is hoppe served in the middle, at the end? Yeah, I'd just love to know more about what the structure is because they're all so different.
So in the Colombian traditions, we typically start the ceremony about 10 o'clock at night. And they go on to like 5 in the morning. That's the earliest that they'll finish, sometimes later. Whereas more in the Peruvian traditions, they start a bit earlier, but they finish very early as well. They'll typically finish about 2 in the morning or something like this. So everybody drinks their little cup of medicine and they go back to their little bed that they have. And there's an hour of silence. So the hour of silence while the medicine is going in, scanning the body to detect, what's needing to be healed. And we call it in Colombian Spanish, we call the effects of the medicine the chuma. So the chuma is the sensations, the feelings, the visions. And then typically, it depends how sensitive each individual is or how blocked they are, but typically the tune will start to come on at that hour mark. And from then on, there's music all night. There's guitars, there's flutes, there's drums, there's singing. And the patients are just there in their bed all night, just doing their own individual work. And we, of course, are there on hand to help them, take them to the toilet, have a chat with them if they need it, give them support if they need it. So we work with happy during the ceremony, sometimes before as well. Personally, in my retreats, I only like them to have happy before the ceremony if they're used to having it, because what can happen is it can make them feel nauseous and then it can interfere with them holding the medicine down. But for myself, for example, during a ceremony, I'll probably work with the happy twice, 2, 3 times during the ceremony. Another thing that happens in the Colombian ceremonies that I've not seen done in Peru is that we have a thing in the middle of the ceremony called a limpieza. So this will typically start about 1, 2 in the morning, and we'll get them in little groups of about 6 at a time. And Taita will be there with his flower water, his waira, which is his leaf rattle, and his harmonica. And he'll basically blow the flower water in their face and dance around them with the waira and the harmonica. This lasts for about 30 minutes. And what he's doing is helping to sweep the trauma out of their body, realign the spirit, realign the chakras. As you know, there's a lot of rebalancing, a lot of chakra work that's done, during the medicine work. And then at the end of that as well, they'll each have their individual cleansing. And of course, as well as to helping to heal the trauma and realigning them, it's imbuing them with protection, abundance, everything that we want them to be carrying back into their life. Another thing that we work with in ceremony is a plant called ortiga. Have you worked with that?
Hmm.
So
No.
Ortiga is basically a huge big stinging nettle, huge
Oh,
big leaves, and it's got all these spikes all the way down the stalk and at the back of the leaf as well. So in ceremony, what we do is we strip down to our underwear and we sit in a chair with our legs splayed, and Taita will whip us all over the body with this Ortiga leaf. It sounds crazy, it sounds awful, but it's amazing, so it is. Ortiga is an amazing plant. Really helps to, it goes straight through your blood. You can feel like the poison seeping into you a little bit, and it cleans out all your blood, your whole lymphatic system, and it's really good as well for re-regulating the nervous system. And afterwards, you feel really energized and really, really invigorated.
beautiful. Yeah, I've used nettle a little bit, which is similar, and it's such a weird thing. Think you're gonna whip yourself with these spikes, but it feels amazing. It's so good,
Totally. Yeah, I love it.
so good. I mean, the things we do in these circles, right? We're
It's crazy.
purging, whipping ourselves with nettles, and but it's really it's amazing. I love it so much.
Absolutely.
And tell me a little bit about the travel to get to where you're going. Is it, I assume a lot of your guests are coming from Europe. And
Yeah.
so what does that look like? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them will come from Europe or the UK. So it's a case of we fly into Bogota, which is the capital city of Colombia, and from there we need to take a little jungle plane to Puerto Asís, just a little hour-long plane. And then when we end up there, we have to get a truck to Orito, and then when we're in Orito, we have to take another truck to drive us to the jungle's edge. And then we have to walk into the jungle to get to like the settlement, and in the settlement there's like big two-floored wooden houses, the Maloka, which is the ceremonial space as well. But it's so beautiful down there.
Beautiful. No, no boats. I like that.
Yeah.
It's the 8-hour boat ride that always kills me on the jungle trips.
Totally.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about, because I've listening to your podcast, I know how much care you offer your participants after ceremony, which is so important, right? So many people are going and doing ayahuasca and then jumping right back into their lives, and you and I both know that time, I would say, especially the week after, 2 weeks to a month, like all that's where all the real magic is happening. And
Yeah.
so and you told me a little bit about this before we got on the call, and I thought it was great. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that.
And that's the thing now, because ayahuasca has become, so prevalent now around the world, which in itself is a really, really good thing. But there's a lot of groups now that are doing this work that shouldn't be doing this work. They don't have a maestro, or they don't have a taita who's there doing all this spiritual and energetic and healing work. There's facilitators, there's people like myself that's just dishing out cups of ayahuasca and everything like this. It's an absolute no-no. Another thing you'll find now in a lot of the retreats that's kind of geared up towards Westerners is, in one weekend they're doing ayahuasca, wachuma, mushrooms, bufo. It's not the indigenous way. It can be physically dangerous, and it can also be very, very spiritually dangerous. And what you'll find is each of these plants have their masters that work with them. If people are offering this type of experience, it's just jack of all trades type of thing. So it's important when we are working with ayahuasca that we're just focusing on the ayahuasca. So for us, we've got a massive community of people that work with us, and they'll fly in from all over the world. Obviously, most of the people are from Europe, and our retreats are in English, but we'll have people coming from America, Australia, Iran, Malaysia, all over to work with us because of the quality of the work and the reputation. So when people want to come to us, and most of the people come to us through word of mouth. They know somebody who's been on one of our retreats. But what we start off with is a call, because it's very important for us to find out about the person, their intentions, safeguarding, all these types of things, helping them to feel comfortable with the process, etc. And then what we do as well is we give them out like a series of preparation videos, everything like this, explaining the diet that they do, setting an intention, why we set an intention, how we set an intention, all these important things that they need to know. And what I've done as well over the years is I've set up hubs in various cities. So we've got in Dublin, Glasgow, and in London as well. So these groups meet up once a month, and it's open to everybody. So there's a lot of people that drink with us that goes to these, but some people that's just maybe a bit curious about what we do, or that wants to do more kind of holistic things in their area. So each month, we'll put on cacao ceremonies, breath work, sound healing. And it's really good for people to go before they come to us, because it helps them to settle into the energy of the community. They can hear from other people that have worked with us. But it's also very, very important in the integration, because they've got that in-person support in these hubs as well to go and connect with each month. But on top of that as well, what I do for the community is we'll have like every month, we'll have online calls, and I'll have people show up, that's drank with us years ago, and they'll still turn up to the calls, just to check in, see how they're doing. And it's really beautiful, because as a community, this is what people really lack in a field, in the modern world, community. And it's so, so important. So, they've got the community there to share all their wins and be really like excited for them, for all the beautiful changes and transformations. But of course, the integration can be challenging at times as well. So it's really important that they've got these groups and calls that they can go to, so as that they can get that advice and the support and the understanding as well on this path.
Yes. Thinking back, to many of your journeys with these people, is there one particular person that you remember and you thought, "Oh man, this poor soul," but then they turned it around and you saw I mean, it sounds like many of the stories on your podcast, but is there one that you want to share, like for someone out there that's maybe feeling like, oh, desperation, or I don't know if this path is for me. Can this really help me? Maybe just give us one of those stories.
Yeah. And it's the beautiful, beautiful thing about this work. So many of these stories over the years, but this is what I want people to remember, is to have hope. There's always hope. There's always the possibility for transformation. I don't care how bad, their life is, what they've been through. We work with people who have been through horrendous things in life. They've been victims of paedophilia and early childhood, and
Mm.
people that's just gone through untold traumas, grief, the loss of loved ones, the addictions, the mental health problems, and at times we'll get people who'll come to us and they'll sit in the call with me and they'll be like, they've had multiple suicide attempts, and they're like, see if this doesn't work, that's it. I'm ending it, and I think especially to see the people that's in that type of situation to come on to retreat, to get the healing that they so desperately need, and then to go on to transform their life and live a beautiful life is amazing. We have one guy that works with us, and he's a professional fighter. So he is, and he always says, he's like, the retreat didn't just change his life, it saved his life. He had lost he used to be, when he was growing up, there was a group of 8 of them, little boys in Scotland. All 7 of them, apart from him, committed suicide. The youngest one was 11 when he took his own life. So this man had suffered the loss of 7 of his friends to suicide. He lost his baby daughter when she was 4 days old. and a pregnant woman jumped in front of his car and committed suicide. And he was at the end point, and his friends who drink with us were trying to get him on retreat for, I think a year or so, and he kept backing out because obviously the fear's there, the nerves are there and everything like that. But he was in a very, very bad state. He came on our retreat, and you should just see this guy now, like flying.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's desperation there. If you can come back from that, you can come back from anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think ayahuasca has given you personally? Like, what has been the gift? I mean, besides the early work and finding it, like, you know, I talk to a lot of people who drink medicine once or twice. And my personal view is you're just getting started. Like, there's so much work to do. There's, it's working with ayahuasca's, it's like a relationship. And you can't expect to go on 1 or 2 dates and know the person and what they're like, and they get to know, like, it probably took me 100 ceremonies to really, really appreciate her and for
Yeah,
her to get to know me.
yeah.
So, well, maybe there may be 2 things. Maybe talk about that. Um, you know, some people say they have 1 ceremony and, they never come back, but I don't know. I don't personally don't get that. Maybe I'm what I call a slow cook.
Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about your view, because you've seen so many people come through, and
Mhm.
what's your view on continuing to work with the medicine? And then I would also like to hear, what is it giving you, like, or what is it continuing to give you, is a better way to look at it, maybe.
It's very interesting because some people will go on one retreat, one weekend retreat, have the 3 ceremonies and, just go through like an absolutely mind blowing transformation. And I've actually had patients like that in the past. One guy's coming to mind. Um, he was, he was really dissatisfied in life. He wanted to find a partner. He had a poor self image, wasn't happy in his job, anything like that. He came on retreat, and I never really heard from him after that. I wasn't showing up to any of the calls or anything, but I got a beautiful email off of him 6 months later. And he says, Claire, he says, that retreat was just phenomenal. He says, but I don't feel as if I have the need to do it again. He says, basically, after the retreat, he says, I really, really acknowledged my loneliness. So I moved in with my friend. And then he introduced me to who's now my partner. They're now married and everything like that, He got a new job. His whole life had transformed. And we do see patients like that. But it's interesting how the medicine works because we've all been through so much in life. We've been through so much trauma. So what you'll typically find is the people will come in one retreat. So you can have somebody that comes on retreat because they're wanting their anxiety and depression treated, right? And in one retreat, it's just gone. Okay. No more. But then what you'll find is, and this is why the integration process is so, so important, because then they have to start implementing all the way of life and all the lessons. And then there's more layers of stuff to work on. And what we find, where I'd say like the vast majority of people, most people will come back to us maybe like once a year or once every couple of years or something like that, just to get that added level of healing. And for many of our patients, it becomes a path. They turn into yahiseros, they turn into medicine workers themselves. We have people that have done like 12 retreats with us, very common that they've done 4, 5, 6, whatever retreats with us. Because I think once people come to ayahuasca and they experience it, it's just so incredible that they want to go to even more depths. And for people to remember as well that it's not all about the healing. It is, but like you say, it's that relationship that we develop. We start to learn so much more about ourselves, about different universes and realms and all these types of things. Like there's an infinite amount of stuff that we're always going to be learning. And for me personally, I think it's interesting because a lot of people that end up, running retreats like myself, the ayahuasca completely transformed their life and saved their life. And that's why they then go on to have this role. My path was different because I transformed my life before I went to ayahuasca. I was 37 before I started drinking the medicine 9 years ago. And I cured myself of my addictions, of my mental health problems. I developed self love. I developed stability within myself and everything like that. So by the time I got to the medicine, I was in a good space. But very much like you, I'm not one of these people that's ever had that wow, really defining, retreat ceremony type of thing. I think because of the space I come into the medicine with. But the real interesting thing is it's when you look back in your path, it's a lot more subtle, and it sounds as if it's very much like that for you as well. It's not until we look back and it's like, wow, look at how much my life has changed, and everything makes sense to me now. It makes sense why I had to go through the path that I went through in life, because it made me able to do this role and to support other people, because I've done that path of transcendence. But I'd say the key thing that came from the medicine for me that I was actually really, really surprised about was, like I said, I've always been extremely empathic, but before I did my healing, I had really poor boundaries. I was very, very sensitive to other people and their emotions, too sensitive, so it would have a negative effect on me. The medicine has made me so strong in myself, so rooted in myself. And you'll know this as well, because just because we start drinking ayahuasca, it doesn't mean that life's dead easy and everything always goes our way. Now we've got tons of stuff that we still need to deal with. And especially working in this realm, there's so many challenges, that we face all the time. But what you notice is the medicine makes you strong enough to weather the storms. You have that stability, the strength, and the resilience, to not be as knocked about by life, essentially, which has just been phenomenal.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I also want to say, so many people think that the ayahuasca space is only about healing, but it's also about prayer, gratitude, and being close to source. I
Yeah,
had this friend ask me once, "Oh, you're going again. Why are you going again?" I was like, I mean, how often do you want to be close to source?
yep,
I want to be close to source as much as possible. And so, it's really important to understand that yes, there's healing available in these spaces, but it's also a space, it's a ritual, right? It's that it allows us to get back to a ceremonial event in our lives where we're, sitting still for 6 7 hours. We're not on our phones, we're listening to music, we're hearing prayers. I mean, that in itself
yep,
is worth going. If
yep.
nothing else
a-
happens, that is worth going. So
Absolutely.
that's yeah,
And I
um,
think it's the interesting thing about healing as well, because, and this is where the fear comes in, people are really scared to do ayahuasca because it's the unknown and it's the fear. Am I going to be able to cope like with what comes up, emotionally or vision wise or this, that, and the next thing? People always prepare themselves for that, but people are never prepared for the divinity, the beauty, and that's heal.
mm,
It's so healing in itself. Ayahuasca doesn't just heal us by helping to heal the traumas. She heals us by putting us in touch with that divine joy and peace and love, all of these divine states that there's no words to describe, isn't there? Not because it's otherworldly, but putting us back in connection with self, with God, with spirit, with nature, with community, and that's the path of the medicine.
totally agree. I love that. I love the being with the divine is also healing. That's such a great way to formulate it. Let's talk a little bit about Europe. I mean, here in the United States, it's the medicine is just exploding. In any weekend, I can't even tell you how many ceremonies happening. So, how do you like? I know there's the ayahuasca conference in Spain this September, which is a great sign of things changing. What do you feel like? What is the feeling in Europe? I know Portugal has legalized it for, when they legalized all of the other um, drugs. But in general, it seems like, the European mindset, at least at the governmental level, is still very closed. Are you seeing any openings? Are more people talking about it? Do you feel like there's a broader acceptance than ever before? Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit about that.
There's definitely a massive shift happening in Europe. Obviously, in Europe, we are many, many different countries, each with their own governments and laws and everything like that. ICEERS is at the forefront of fighting for this. It's a body of lawyers that are fighting for the freedom of the medicine. There's actually a very pivotal case that's getting taken to the Supreme Court in France at the moment. So they basically did this guy, with running ceremonies, because in France it's classy illegal. It's in the UK and Ireland it also is. It's got the same classification as heroin. So in these countries it's very, very illegal. But basically this is getting taken to the Supreme Court, and they're fighting basically because they're saying under the Religious and Cultural Freedom Act. Do you know what I mean? That it should not be illegal. And they're also bringing a wealth of scientific data to it as well, do you know, that are published in a lot of the scientific journals, for example, showing the benefits of this. Like, we know this for a fact now, and it's backed by science. We can see this by the brain imaging scans, how it's working on the brain in patients, for example, with depression, etc. So what they're stating in this case is that, it shouldn't be banned based on all of this evidence. So what they're essentially saying that, and they think that this case is going to fall, but when it does, it's going to have implications for the rest of Europe as well. But there's definitely a softening of it. Yeah.
Great. And what's it like to live part-time in Colombia and part-time in the Western world? What is like, how do you transition and, find your, like, I find it so fascinating to move. I go down to the jungle and when I come back, it's like for a month, I'm like, what is this culture? All these things and so fast paced and yeah, I'm wondering how you maneuver that.
I mean, where I live in Colombia is Medellin, so it's like a big city. It's very busy and everything like that. So, yeah, I mean, coming out from the jungle, especially when you've been down there, you're not on your phone or anything like this. There's no noise pollution. There's no light pollution. There's not a care in the world, when you're down there. Um, at times when you come off retreat, it can be a bit jarring when you're going back to a busy place, the cities and everything like that. But, for me, myself, I think I've been doing this work for 9 years now, and I've always been coming and going and everything. And I quite like the city life as well. So I do. I live by the beach here. It's very spacious and everything like that. I live a quiet life here. So I think it's pretty much kind of all of your own choosing, isn't it? But yeah, Bajarin for me, I'm very like noise sensitive. I don't like being in places where there's just too much energy all the time. I like the relaxed pace of life.
Yeah, me too. I live in a really small town called Ojai in California. And when I lived in Spain for a few years and then I was going to India and Nepal and Indonesia, and I was like, I'm never going back to the United States. I grew up in Southern California, and then I found this place, which is in the mountains, but near the ocean. I'm a surfer too, so I have to have the water. So, like, there are places out there that do have all of those, nature and quiet, but you got to look for them for sure.
But I
It's
think it's nice
beautiful.
that we can dip in and out the different cultures, and it's one of the
Yeah,
real
no,
beautiful things like about the ayahuasca cultures. Like they're so open to everybody. Like, they don't care what your religion, your skin color, your culture is. It's just they're so welcoming. They just want people to be doing this work, and I feel that in our societies, with globalization and everything like that, we really lost touch with, because we were pagan at one time, weren't we? In our types of societies, and we worship the moon and the sun and the stars and nature, and it's essentially been cut off quite a bit, in these types of societies. So I think it's really interesting how people like ourselves, are finding our way back to this, but through other people's cultures, that really, really welcome us in, and are happy to show us the way, because they've still got it so strong within their cultures.
yeah, much of what I'm studying in the course with Josh at the Emerald is really returning to those ways of life and honoring the animate and spirit and ancestors, like all the thing. It goes so well with the lineages of South America. That just I'm just thinking as I speak that. Can you tell us a little bit about the the historical in Scotland? I know about the Druids, right? But were the Druids also in Scotland? And is any of that, animate view still alive in some places, or has it been, totally erased?
There's still some places in Scotland that are very much of the old way of life, especially in the kind of more northern parts. I remember, and it was only a few years back, some islanders were absolutely kicking off because they were going to start launching the ferry on a Sunday. That is their day, like just to rest. You're not doing anything on a Sunday. Do you know the supermarkets and everything are closed? All this type of thing. So in the north you will still get more types of communities like that, and there's Gaelic that's spoken as well in the north. So and there out with the big cities they've kind of more held on to it, but I would say it's probably like a lot of Scotland, like a lot of the other western countries now, have all been really westernized. But there
Yeah,
is there is a renaissance, going back to nature now, within our own cultures. Yeah, definitely.
beautiful. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the world out there? And please give, where people can find you and where they can join you on retreat. Uh,
So we are called Jahiwaska. I'll send you. It's quite a tricky word, so it is. So I'll send you that, and you can just pop it in at the bottom in the link. But what I would say to people is, a lot of people now have heard of ayahuasca and they're contemplating working with ayahuasca. But the thing that stops them is the fear, and I just want to say to them that there really is nothing to fear so long as you're working with the right people who are doing good work, from the heart with a lot of skill, a lot of experience, that's given the support along the way. It's just so life changing, like it gets right to the depths of everything. Such a beautiful, beautiful path.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll drop all the links in the show notes for everyone. And please, if you're listening to this and you feel called, join Claire on a retreat. It sounds like it would be an amazing experience.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you, Claire. Don't you just love her accent? I could listen to that forever. I love that Scottish accent so much. was a great interview. I really enjoyed having Claire on. She's doing wonderful work. If you want to connect with her and take a trip to Colombia or find out more about her work, her Instagram is Ayahuasca Official. So I'm going to spell that because it's a little weird. Yahe is the word for ayahuasca in Colombia. So it's YAGEWASKAOFFICIAL. Ayahuasca Official. And you can find out all about her work and connect with her there. So awesome to have her on the podcast. Please leave us a review if you are feeling called and hit that subscribe button. Follow this journey. It's going to be amazing. It is amazing. And I'd love to take you along with me and share all these beautiful interviews I'm having. I'm going to try to up the podcast with more episodes more often, but more or less it's about every 10 days. Look forward to the next one, and hoosh.
I hear the voice of my grandmother calling me. I hear the voice of my grandmother's song. She says, stand in your power, women, stand in your power. Stand in your power, women, stand in your power. And listen, 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 listen. I hear the voice of my grandmother calling me. I hear the voice of my grandmother's song. She says, give birth, give life, mothers, give birth, give life. Give birth, give life, mothers, give birth, give life. And listen, 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 listen. I hear the voice of my grandmother calling me. I hear the voice of my grandmother's song. She says, be strong, be wise, women, be strong, be wise. Be strong, be wise.